To start, hi everyone. My name is Patrik Berglund. I'm CMO at Xeneta. Welcome to our very first fireside chat talk show live. We are at the Xeneta headquarters in very cold Oslo, Norway, nearing up to the end of the year. I'm joined today by Thomas Sørbø, our Chief Operating Officer, and Patrik Berglund, our CEO. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
This very cozy setting that we have here today. I'm looking down at my notes, so as I said, this is our very first talk show, and our goal is to have a very informal chat together with both Patrik and Thomas. We're going to tackle some of the headline-making stories that we had in 2016 within the shipping, logistics, and supply chain industry. We scheduled about 45 minutes. We're going to do 30 to 35 minutes. We are opening up for questions. In the webinar tool, on the right-hand side, you can ask your questions, and I will look at those towards the end, and I'll start asking those to Thomas and Patrik after we go through the questions that we have in place. Let's see if there's anything else. We are recording. We are running live, and we're also recording this, so we will upload that to our YouTube channel, which is called Xeneta channel. You'll all get an email about that after the recording, or after this live broadcast. Okay, so I'm going to take a seat back. You'll only see my hands moving, and I'll have focus then on Patrik and Thomas. We outlined some questions here, but first I want to say, personally, I think it's been a very exciting year in shipping and logistics for not a actual shipping person myself, but we've had a lot to write about for myself and our whole team in terms of external comms. Our blog and our PR has actually exploded because there's just been so many amazing topics and so many things have happened in 12 months in this industry. And at one point over the summer, I even compared the industry to a soap opera in one of the blog posts that I wrote. And at that point, the Hanjin disaster hadn't even happened yet. So if we go back to earlier in the year, around Q1 or so, we put out some news. One of them was, we talked about the container being a commodity. We talked about volume doesn't really matter, and we talked about why the industry or commodity type or industry type doesn't matter either when it comes to ocean freight pricing. So if we only look at why volume doesn't matter when it comes to the freight pricing, and that was perhaps a little bit controversial when we put that out early in the year. We received some feedback and comments on that and made for great discussions. Patrik. So take us back on your thoughts here, because that was something that was posted under your name, and you have some strong opinions on that, as well as Thomas. So that's going to be our first topic. Why doesn't volume matter?
Yeah, so let's, in order to understand why we said that, we need to look a little bit more historically than just this year. Because what we started seeing in 2014 and going into 2015 is that a lot of the long-term contracts were tied in at a level that was so high for the whole year of 2015, while the shorter-term market plummeted in going from 2014 into 15. So that actually made for a market landscape where a lot of the bigger volume players that had long-term contracts paid way more than smaller volume players who very often go in short-term or spot market. If you leave aside some certain commodities, that is like scrap metal, waste paper, which quite often can also operate in that market. But we saw from 14 like a landscape where you had the average of long-term contracts tied in at a level that were below the short-term market. So just those two things, the shift going into 15 on those, we could easily see that smaller volume players were paying less because they were in a different market. You can't compare the long-term price development with the short-term one. It's completely different markets, and the prices move very volatile in the short-term one. But in 15, they were overall way below. And then Chinese New Year came towards the end of 15 there, and everyone knew that the market had been plummeting. Everyone keeps following the CFI and so forth. So what happened going into 16 is that this chunk of long-term contracts were shifted significantly downwards. So what we already knew towards the end of 15 is that these companies, these carriers, shipping lines, had bled millions of dollars. And now we were entering a new year where this massive volume of long-term contracts moved down. And the short-term market had spiked up during the Chinese New Year from 15 to 16. But there was this underlying problem of overcapacity in the market, which very quickly caused that to drop. And I remember this very clearly when we were around March. We saw like a bottom end of the market where both long-term and short-term contracts were at such a record low level. And since then, the market has developed, and we'll talk more about that. But these mechanisms, how the short-term market moves in relation to the long-term market, is really what caused us to publish that kind of information. And that's just based on pure volume, because adding one final note to this, sorry, Thomas, would be that we of course have seen like a 10,000 TEU BCO pay less than a 40,000 one as well. This is a matter of both going on long-term contracts. This is a matter of negotiation skills and how sophisticated you run your RFQs and what you take into account now and what really matters for you, whether you have high-value goods or low-value goods and so forth.
Yeah, okay. You can also see that quite a lot of the larger BCOs with long-term contracts that needs the predictability of long-term contract, they also are following the market. So either us or other indices out there, and then obviously going into 2016, while they were tendering, they also took advantage of the drop in the market. And then obviously fixed their rate at the level were so low that we've seen that it becomes and has become a huge problem for the entire industry.
Yeah, and I think that's why we've seen a lot of interesting mechanisms this year, which we haven't really picked up before. Like I love this example where several of our customers and BCOs had proactively reached out to their suppliers to ask for a price increase. That to me was unprecedented, because it's simply not sustainable, and the risk of having such a low price is, when you look at it from a total landed cost perspective, it's not worth it, right?
How do you, so now, given how the market has been after summer, what are your thoughts on that? Have they changed, or are they similar?
You want to start?
So the market has shifted dramatically. The long-term contracts are still at a very, very low level if the shippers have been able to actually get their cargo shipped. Because we've heard from a lot of our customers that there's been problems with actually getting the cargo off the dock from China to Europe. And also, if you're looking into the shorter-term market, it's been going straight up.
Yeah, I mean,
month over month, an upward trend.
Yeah, I mean, this is in general for all the big corridors, as Thomas points out. But if you look at Far East Asia into South America, for instance, you've seen some insane development this year, where the average of a 40-footer has gone from like $100 to $4,000 in a matter of 5-6 months. So you got to keep in mind that long-term contracts are negotiated on the back of how that market develops. And we're currently in the midst of the main tender cycle for European BCOs or shippers, while we're closing in on the US one. So now it's a different landscape than in the beginning of end of 14 and 15 as well, going into 16. So.
Okay. So one of the dramatic things that happened this summer within shipping was that the 7th largest line, Hanjin, went under, completely went bust, and that was a wow moment. For many, perhaps it was expected. For others, and especially those that had trouble getting their cargo, it was a complete disaster. Thomas, what was your immediate reaction? How do you think this has affected the market? What's your overall thought on what's going on with Hanjin?
It really depends, but obviously for the ones that had their cargo on those vessels, it's had an extreme effect. They've had their products on ships that haven't been delivered. They might miss maybe the most important season during the whole year and lost millions. But also looking back, I think it's, for a lot of people, it was a surprise that it was Hanjin that actually went down and not another carrier. Because there were there were episodes and they were happening before the Hanjin bankrupt with another carrier that you can now, in retrospective, you can obviously question why Hanjin. But also, I think what also accelerated the bankruptcy was also what happened then before it went bust, with quite a lot of forwarding companies and shippers seeing that there's something happening now and pulling volumes from that specific carrier that just accelerated the downward trend.
Oh, and obviously, it's the whole incident is it actually impacts a lot of people, which makes it really a disaster, and especially smaller volume shippers who might have tied up a lot of capital in the cargo stuck in those boxes, which is yet to be released. And what I do think, though, is very interesting to see is a change in the industry and the attention it received. All of a sudden, the industry were on the main news channels, because all of a sudden everyone realized that this industry has an effect on everyone, right? And it also lifted the attention from something that logistics guys or supply chain folks in an organization deals with to something that became strategically important for top management in organizations. That's actually been a slightly positive outcome of the position of logistics and supply chain, because it's vital. It's like an artery for the businesses.
What also you can comment there is that I think, looking at the landscape, you have the alliances. So you'd also see the risk component of being part of an alliances. And I think there's a lot of shippers and also forwarders that have now used the entire autumn and also into winter to actually get an overview of their exposure. Because they might, have made a booking with one carrier, but the container actually moved with a Hanjin ship. So to get the kind of total overview, I just spoke with some forwarders a couple of weeks ago where, they've had huge problems with this. They have an exposure towards their customer, but they also have a huge exposure internally in terms of cost. Because in this situation, like in any other crisis, there are people and companies being opportunistic and trying to make a lot of money on others' problems.
There's also something about this psychology that comes into play here now that we're in the main tender season for Europe and closing in on the one that's going to be starting in the new year for US-based BCOs, shippers, and this has kind of created a bit more fear, and it also made them more open-minded about the price levels. Because if I think back 1.5 years, everything was about just squeezing the price down because the market had been plummeting for such a longer period of time, and now it's more about finding the right price, a competitive price. What can we what is the rate that we can get our goods shipped on, which is a different mindset that we've seen.
And also, obviously, an effect from that, also from the summer, more and more shippers have started to experience, even if we were talking about oversupply, that their cargo wasn't shipped. And that obviously also have an effect now into the minds of the people that are now going to negotiate the contracts for next year. What is the most important thing?
Yeah.
Is it to get the rate reduction, or is it actually to get the products into the store to get them sold?
It's one of the most interesting dynamics we saw playing out this year. That around March again, when it was like an all-time low, a lot of the LCL boxes were designed to be shipped as an FCL. So instead of putting 10 companies that had X amount of pallets into one box, these companies decided that it's cheaper for me to buy a whole box myself, and I'll just fill it with two pallets, which of course then took up a lot more capacity, and all of a sudden we started getting reports of BCOs, shippers getting short shipped, and we were thinking, wow, it's a lot of overcapacity, how is that even possible? And this was one of the dynamics that drew this, created it.
It's an interesting point. I mean, we closed off Hanjin, there's still reported that there's still cargo lost at sea, not going to make it into stores for Christmas. Again, if I look back at some of the things that we wrote, we kind of joked a little bit about the Grinch that stole Christmas. We talked about Santa's not going to come this year, which is obviously very unfortunate. But I think you made a great point, Patrik, talking about it finally came to light on how important shipping overall is to trade. I mean, if you're a regular person just looking to buy things for your family for Christmas, you don't really think about what goes behind all of that. And unfortunately, this situation actually brought it to light for many people. So that is interesting how events, new current events affect everything. Thomas, you talked and you mentioned alliances. So we're going to go into alliances. It's a bit of it's so interesting. I've had a hard time keeping up with alliances and his infographics that we have. Like, I keep changing them constantly. It's like with marriage and divorce all the time with new alliances, new shipping lines coming together, some being cast overboard. So the question is for a lot of people is, do they provide any value? You know, what is the value of an alliance? Let's just start with that, Thomas.
The value of an alliance is obviously that the intention is that you can utilize a big network. So by having a contract with one in that alliances, you can get actually spread your product all over the world, and not being dependent on going to a lot of different carriers. But obviously, also on the flip side, the risk component in this. Obviously, if you then also look back to the Hanjin, the exposure companies have that didn't have a contract with them but still were exposed. This is obviously a challenge that's been informed here.
I think if you're going to look at this from a pure buyer point of view, I think it's something that worries a lot of the shippers BCOs that we talk to. They're wondering how to really interpret and understand these alliances and how to run their RFQs and tenders, and whether they should invite one from each. I mean, how do you safeguard that they do not collaborate on price? All of these things that's made them.
And maybe on the past you selected a carrier that stands out for efficiency, quality, short transit times, but then suddenly they're in alliances with a carrier that stands for the opposite.
Yeah, it makes
to get the kind of transparency and visibility into these alliances. I know for a fact that's been a huge problem for quite a lot of shippers.
Yeah, I agree. It makes it a little bit unclear. It's also a very difficult composition of suppliers that you're approaching to really understand what you're procuring from a buyer point of view. And I think it's actually something that potentially weakens the offering in the market for the buyers.
Less differentiation, would you say that?
Yeah, less differentiation, less. It seems like less competitive landscape, right? Fewer players to select from, and then everyone can kind of theoretically understand. I understand it's the network utilization and all that, but still you have fewer to go to acquire what you want to procure.
So, if you're out of an alliance, let's say we had two independent players, and right before Maersk took over Hamburg Süd a couple of weeks ago, and HMM didn't make it all the way through with the two with Maersk. What happens then? So if you're out, are you out?
Let's see how this, as you mentioned as well, this keeps. This is an ongoing chess play that we've seen over the last couple of years at least, and I'd say at least that it's natural to think that those who stand outside would seek certain niches. Like I think Hamburg did that as well, and they've been doing that for quite some time, but they've been successful in that, and that of course made them an even more attractive acquisition strategically for Maersk Line, what they would add to their fleet in terms of where their market shares were and all of that, and in particular, and if it goes through pending confirmation from the authorities, of course, the amount of reefer boxes within South Africa and the market share they will be getting there, it seems like a very beneficial acquisition for Maersk Line. But linking that to alliances, I think my at least immediate answer would definitely be around these players that stands outside. Most likely likely will be forced to seek out a certain niche that they can have a sustainable, create a sustainable environment within for them.
Okay, so we mentioned mergers and acquisitions, right? That's happened. Is that the way to go, and are we going to see more of them?
That's a good question, but it's probably not over yet.
No, I don't think it's over either, but I actually think it really depends a lot about how the market now develops. Right? So we've seen on all big corridors a market that trends significantly upwards. If now, and we're also seeing that a lot of the negotiations for these longer-term contracts are pushed, which means that the companies on the supply side believes it will be in an even better position for them to negotiate down the road. Otherwise, they would try to rush it on, right? So if that really happens, then, and this industry is very cyclical, right? We've seen that before. So if that really happens, you will have a more sustainable market, and the incentives and the dynamics that's been in place now that basically have forced a lot of this through is changed. And that might actually pause it. But the way we've seen it over a longer period of time, talking about some years, if that trend continues downwards, and this is just a little blip, then we'll definitely see more of it.
I think we also see that some of these carriers now will be busy integrating the acquired ones in their current operation, like for example Hapag-Lloyd and Maersk Line now with Hamburg Süd. It will also take up a lot of time and resources for them just to focus internally to make these two companies work together. So I think they're going to be extremely busy doing that, and that also, who knows, open up opportunities for others. So it's going to, I think it's going to be an interesting next year and the year after that again.
I've heard quite a lot of people that either sit some senior positions within carriers or freight forwarding side and BOCC and also BCO speculating whether it's the alliances eventually forms of the 3 shipping lines that's going to be in the industry. And going back to what we discussed a little bit earlier, it's from a pure buyer point of view, it's not beneficial with these alliances, and then imagine that kind of scenario.
Interesting. We've said now that, and since the summer, we've experienced a couple of, or a few GRIs. The last one in November is one that seems to have held the most, at least for the Asia-Europe route. And we see the prices trending upwards, right? So we have been seeing that continuously when we look at the overall general landscape. Last week, we wrote a blog post asking our social media community if it was a seller's or a buyer's market looking into 2017. What do you guys think about that? Is it too soon to tell, or can we have some indication already now?
What we see at least from data and rates that we receive from our customers is that the long-term rates for 2017 is at a substantial higher level contracted today for the next year. But it doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way, because it's just so much uncertainty at the freight forwarder side. And if you ask your carrier, obviously they're going to say that yes, the market is going upward. But will it happen? Will it not? So there's so much uncertainty going on at the moment.
Yeah, several of the bigger buyers I've been talking to, they have also made sure that they instill some clauses in their long-term contracts now that allows them to renegotiate on a quarterly basis rather than locking in a one-year deal, but also with the ability actually to prolong it. So they try to position themselves in a bit more favorable way depending on how the market then moves. Because if you really nail it with the long-term contract, the market goes up, that's absolutely fantastic. That doesn't help anything if you get short ship or rolled, right? So there's all these kind of things to take into consideration, and then if the root cause of the problem is still there with overcapacity, then you would expect to see dips in 2017 as well, And the only thing that I feel is really against that is the fact that now for 2-3 years the carriers have bled billions of dollars. It's not sustainable, so it needs to go up. But yeah, I think whether it's a buyer or seller's market is very, very difficult. I think the top performers that I've seen, they're the ones who try to bake in mechanisms in their contracting that would allow them to adapt and adjust more to how the market develops than just taking a blind bet for 12 months.
I would also like to add there, because the ones that I see being maybe the most agile or following best practice doesn't longer follow just, the tender one time per year for my entire global volume, because the different corridors behave so differently. So why should you then have a strategy to do everything in one go? Yes, it might save you time, but if it comes down to cost and the flexibility and quality, you might want to reevaluate that.
Yeah, if you can truly measure it in US dollars, it might not be a cost, it might be a huge cost saving, right?
So we talked about then, you mentioned negotiations. So with this, we talked about it a couple of times now through this show. Now is the time that many European companies are having their contract negotiations. We have reported, and you mentioned we've already seen some increase already in Xeneta. What can we further say looking into 2017? Just want to remind you, last year around this time, wow, I didn't even know this. It's actually to the date, December 15th, 2015, we put out a PR that Xeneta's 2016 long-term contract data confirms shipping freight prices further decline. Am I not going to be writing that now going into 2017, or am I going to be writing actually the opposite? So what do we already see? We have some data. Can you give more specifics on current negotiations?
Okay, so the vast majority of what we see, as Thomas mentioned, is significant price hikes. Right?
But also that a lot of companies now ask for some time to not tender, because there's just too much smoke, there's too much uncertainty, so they just wait.
And we also had some BCOs reporting cost savings going into 17. Right, so their baselines has been reduced, but then it's also a question of where did their baselines sit in 2016. It might be that they, going out of 15, missed quite a lot on the following year's contract where they should have been compared to the rest, because we always see that it's a quite significant spread in this market, right? So maybe they just improved that, which is the opposite of what we see of the majority of the data, as we're saying. But I think what the point Thomas is making is incredibly interesting, because last year we got a lot of data uploaded into the platform because it was an easier tender cycle to run than we see happening this year. There's a lot of delays and postponements in this run. So that's why we're also a bit cautious about saying exactly how it will play out. And then Chinese New Year is up. Will it then plummet as we've seen the other years? That would actually be a better time for the buyers to then go in and say the price increases are not holding up, so we want to be down here.
I also want to add, so one thing is, rates going up, but the challenges for quite a lot of the procurement people on the BCO shipper side, it's a tough challenge, because some of them might have had their incentives tied to cost reductions, and they, by now looking at the market and seeing the development, see now a cost increase. There are also quite a lot of people spending now time trying to set the right expectations with their management, with the financials, in terms of a cost increase next year, and also then to make sure that it's properly justified, and also the expectations for next year will be at a completely different level than today. So it's uncertainty on the shipper side, it's uncertainty on the forwarder side, and also I've seen quite a lot of forwarders are also very careful committing on long-term deals next year because of the risk exposure, because they are not getting a back-to-back agreement with, for example, a carrier.
I think, yeah. I think, so what we're saying is that there's a lot of uncertainty on both sides of the table, right? Or even all three sides if you can take into account the MUCCs. And I think for this particular reason, one of the main questions we've had, or most frequently asked questions we've had this year is, what are our alternatives from a shipper BTO point of view? How can we find some mechanisms that takes away this pain and the uncertainty? Because what they're really chasing is a competitive price. Not necessarily the cheapest one, right? But a competitive price that safeguards that your supply chain is more or less free of risk and that your cargo is running. Yeah.
What are the alternatives?
Well, we published in 16 some information around that as well, and it's obvious that you can use various tools and mechanisms and data to adjust the prices. That makes it fair for both the buyer and the supplier side. So that's, I guess, the shortest answer we can come up with for this session, right?
So we're closing up soon. I wanted to open up for questions, but there's two more things that I wanted to touch upon. Let's switch gears a little bit, and so we are a shipping logistics company, but we are actually also a software technology company, and there's been a lot of talk this year just about technology really sort of igniting the shipping supply chain logistics world. There's a lot of players coming in. I mean, we've been around since 2012, 2013, and within that time and up until today, there's quite many tech companies popping up in the space. We've also written a lot about just how technology is going to change and revolutionize this industry and make everything streamlined and more efficient, and et cetera. We even have Maersk, for example, setting up a whole digital department and really looking further into that, and KN also setting up a digital and further data department and focusing on technology. Is the industry ready for this? And your thoughts. So is the industry ready for this, and what are your thoughts overall on this technology?
I can jump first. Yeah, it's for us, thinking back when we started in 2012, how much focus was it on this space back then? It's nothing. And that's, if you now look back a year, it's happened so much. There's so much attention going on when it comes to how technology can make changes, how things can be more efficient, the transparency topic. All of these things now happening at the same time, it's just incredible.
Yeah, the initiatives you mentioned, but also several of these players are setting up their own venture arms to invest in startups and new initiatives. They're incentivizing employees to break free and come up with new solutions, looking at different ways of working with innovation. The whole mindset has changed in the years Tom is referring to. And on top of that, you will have venture capital being poured into logistics, supply chain, transportation. So I still think that me and Thomas is fairly humble about how that it's more of an evolution than it is a disruption, to be honest. But it's more and more focused, and it increases the pace of how this change is occurring in an industry. And simultaneously with this, you have younger and younger people that are quite technology savvy moving into decision-making positions, which further fuels all this. And then finally also the fact that the industry has been downward trending in terms of profitability and prices has also made them more open-minded to look at alternatives. And although there are just some of the things that we've seen happening since 2012, and it keeps on accelerating. It's a very interesting period of time for our space.
Interesting, good. Final thoughts for this year, going into next year. And we get 1 minute to answer. And then we're going to, 1 minute each, we're going to jump into some questions. There's some questions lined up here from our viewers.
I think we're going to still experience a lot of volatility. I think there will be a lot of challenges going in terms of the economics, and also in terms of rates going up and down. I think there's going to be quite a lot of exposure to short shipments, and I think depending on the corridor, but that we will see a general higher rate level next year than this year, because it's basically not sustainable at all.
I think you sum up it nicely as well. I'd agree to that. I think some of my expectations as well for next year would be around what you actually brought up, like not new inventions, but how much more adoption new technology will get during 2017, because I've seen that dramatically change in 2016, and I expect that to continue. And I think those are tools that stakeholders in the industry try to utilize more wisely now in 2017 to adapt to some of the circumstances Thomas is outlining.
Thank you both, and I'm going to go to some questions. There's a couple of questions here. So if I look at, let's see, we have Mike Wackett from the Lodestar. Merck's volume between January and September consisted of 35% spot, 45% long-term contract, with 20% on short-term contract of 1 to 3 months. Which way do you see this 20% of volume going in 2017?
So let me recap and see if I got it correctly. So 20% of their volumes from which period?
From 1 to 3 months.
Yeah, but which time period?
January, September to September.
And the question is about how do we see that develop?
These 20%. Which way do you see this 20% of their volume going in 2017?
In terms of rates. It's a brilliant question. As with longer-term contracts as well, it will fluctuate depending on the short-term contracts. So the short-term contracts will move before those are adjusted, simply because the validity period is longer, right? So the question actually is whether the short-term market will continue to trend upwards during 2017. Otherwise, if let's say after Chinese New Year the short-term market goes down, these one will fall, but with a delay in time, right? So the question is whether we believe that will be trending upwards. And referring to what you said, Thomas, it's just so much smoke now that as we cross over Chinese New Year and give that a month or so, you will start to see something. But it's not a very easy crystal ball to look into at the moment. It's very, very tough, and you get a lot of information from the market that's contradictory, right? So best guess is, as Thomas said, I think if you compare 17 to 16, we believe it's going to be an uptick. On overall, an uptick. It can't stay on that level because otherwise we'll have another Hanjin incident, right? So I think that's the answer.
Okay, good. We have a lot of questions. I'm going to move quickly, and if you can be as concise as possible. Do you think that Hanjin provided capacity? Do you think that Hanjin provided capacity will be missed on the market, or is it that just the carrier with the cheap rates disappeared from the market? Do you think, so is their capacity going to be missed, or is it just that they're the cheap rates?
No,
I think it's just going to be absorbed.
Yeah. So the capacity will come back into play.
Okay.
Now the prices really out of the fact that it's the Hanjin was equal to low rates, but I think there will always be some players at the bottom end of the market, and we all know some of these names that it's at least rumored to have those prices, but yeah.
Okay, ship sizes continue to grow for container vessels. We're now looking at 23,000 TEU ships being designed. Is this any different from tanker expansion in the late 70s? When ULCCs over 350,000 were being built, sooner or later the industry realized that the UL size was too big for oil trading. Will this happen for container ships, and at what point do they realize that a 20,000 plus TEU is simply too big, or does that not happen at all?
I think it has started to happen.
Yeah, and we wrote this piece about whether the carriers were their own worst enemy. Mm-hmm. Essentially releasing all of this capacity into the market, creating this cascading effect into smaller corridors and so forth.
And it affects terminals and it affects distribution, because when you have these big batches of boxes coming in. It's a knock-on effect on the total supply chain that might not be good.
Theoretically speaking, if you look at rate development since the 60s, it's been going down. So searching for economies of scale makes full sense, but it's not enough volume out there.
Okay, next question. What kind of procurement strategy would you recommend to a BCO with over 5,000 TEUs from China to the North American West Coast for a contract period? Wow, okay. Considering volume commitments for a contract period of looking for, next year and 12 months after. What kind of strategy would you recommend there? So,
depending on type of commodity in particular, it's.
I would also say it depends on if it's high value goods and you are very, very dependent on constant supply, I would be very cautious.
To follow up on that, because I'd be happy to answer that question with a lot of reflections, but a main thing I would do if I were in a buyer's shoes today in that scenario is to figure out how I can give myself as much flexibility as possible, just to deal with the smoke situation that we described.
Okay. Similar question. For those with one-year contracts starting in April, when do you expect that the market would offer the optimum time to agree to fixed rates? So we talked a little bit about delaying stuff before the European negotiations. We'll go into American negotiations or North American ones in the spring. Will those also be postponed? But when is the optimal time? That's the question here for contracts starting in April.
Yeah, that's so companies tender what we call on-cycle and off-cycle, right? But it really depends on where the market is. So that's why I think the data that we're servicing as well is a crucial component to keep an eye on what the market for all your corridors, because we can be talking about this 5,000 TEU BCO, or we can be talking about a 50,000 or 500,000. They all have various lanes around the world, trade corridors that they move cargo that develops differently at different points in time. So Thomas' point were that you might not necessarily, if you rig it so that you can tender it in different times, you can track all of these corridors individually and optimize the timing for each and every one of them. It all depends how you structure your RFQ, which tools you use to make it efficient and so forth.
I think we have time for just one more question. And the questions that we don't get to, we will answer those individually to the people that have asked them. How do you see Maersk's strategy of becoming a logistic company, putting together the Maersk Damco APM terminal? Well, I believe that's actually the comment that they ended up doing, and saying that they want to be like DHL, aiming a logistics market of $1 trillion versus ocean only of $190 billion. Do you believe Maersk can be successful, as no other carrier has been successful when trying to be a freight forwarder?
They've tried before, and it totally makes sense. But I guess the problem and the challenge is, can you really align all those incentives along these companies and all these different supply chains and all the different needs from the different customers, and also to have the right incentives for the people that are working there?
It's such a huge beast to move, but as Thomas pointed out, it makes complete sense. And maybe it's no other alternative for them. If you think about all the carriers, if they stay on, let's simplify this and call it a port-to-port value proposition, they might risk ending up being a steel mover, right? Because someone else will own the customer relationship that takes care of the broader supply chain. And of course, all carriers understand this, and that might definitely be one of the initiatives that Maersk Line is pulling together in order to deal with that challenge.
Okay. That's our last question that we can take. We are right on time. Thank you so much, Thomas and Patrik.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone that has joined us. As I mentioned, we will post this on our YouTube channel, Xeneta channel, shortly. You can view it there. We will continue these talk shows or fireside chat style events into 2017. We wish you a very happy holidays and a happy New Year in 2017 to everyone. Thanks a lot. Bye for now.